I'd like to kick this off with a video. It's a way for us to think back 30 years to 1990 and what it means to grow for 30 years here in Lincoln and Lancaster County, because what we're charged with doing here is looking forward 30 years to 2050. And you'll notice in the video and some things that we talk about tonight and how much things change in 30 years. So with that, I think we'll get the video going. And then I'll come back up and we'll continue to have a conversation. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
You've got mail.
Hypercolor clothing changes color with heat.
It's easy to squeeze your way to shapely hips and thighs.
Schlesinger has another touchdown.
That'll do it. Nebraska has won the national championship.
I've declared a general state of emergency.
3, 2, 1, happy 2000!
Play ball!
I didn't know what Facebook was. It sounds like a huge waste of time.
Dow at the same time has fallen about 18%.
Where the deer and the antelope play.
Maybe you can drive my car. Bicycle, bicycle, bicycle.
A lot has happened over the last 30 years. What's in store for the next 30? By 2050, there will be over 100,000 new residents in Lancaster County, with the majority of those in Lincoln. A more diverse population with new needs and wants, a changing climate that will require a more resilient and sustainable community, new transportation options, new housing solutions, smarter connected cities, and who knows, maybe there will be flying cars or self-aware robots. All these things are possible, so how do we ensure that Lincoln and Lancaster County have the best future? Plan Forward is the theme for the Lincoln-Lancaster County 2050 Comprehensive Plan. The Comprehensive Plan establishes the community vision. What do we want for Lincoln and Lancaster County over the next 30 years? And provides a roadmap for achieving that vision in topics such as land use, economy, housing, transportation, health, and sustainability. Plan Forward will be a forward-thinking document to guide the community to a thriving, resilient, innovative, and livable future. At the same time, we'll be updating our long-range transportation plan to provide a detailed analysis of the community's transportation needs. This plan is a community effort, and we need your help. Visit PLANforward2050.com to take the visioning survey, learn more about the comprehensive plan, and sign up for the mailing list. All right, so I cannot play the guitar. I've been asked that several times this evening already, so don't anticipate that happening, but maybe a goal of mine by the end of our process is to actually learn how to play the guitar. So that would be good. So obviously a lot changes over 30 years. When you look back to 1990, there's an awful lot of things that take place. And when it comes to planning, it's something that we want to be aware of, that when we look that far into the future, we know that things are going to change. And so what we want to do is have a community conversation about what our community's needs will be, what we need to make sure happens, and then give it some context and some way to talk about what we want our community to become over a long period of time. So through this presentation, what I'm going to do is kind of give you a little bit of kind of thinking points about this to kind of set the stage for our process. So let's think back 30 years to 1990. So the first web server was created in 1990, the beginning of the World Wide Web. And you think about how much has changed just because of that one advancement in technology over the last 30 years, how different our lives are because of that. Keep in mind on technology there for a moment. How many of us have a mini computer in our pockets right now, or holding it in our hands? 1% of the population back in 1990 had a cell phone, not a smartphone, but a cell phone. So those types of things can really change. So think about what 2050 will look like in the future. Things like the unification of East and West Germany took place at that point. Mikhail Gorbachev won the Nobel Peace Prize. Home Alone, the first one, was the #1 movie. I graduated from high school, and it's not a big deal for all of you, but for my parents it was a big deal. But the point is that my entire adult life has taken place since 1990. So that is a significant amount of time, over 30 years. So it's exciting, and it's also a little bit daunting to think of it that way. So what you see on the screen today is a map of the city of Lincoln. And what is in blue is what the city limits were in 1990. And what you see in the darker gray is all the areas that the city has annexed into the city over the last 30 years. So there's some significant land area, and a lot has happened since then. And so to put it in perspective, we were a city of about 193,000 back then. And so we have grown by almost 100,000 since then. And to give a little sneak peek into the future, our projections are telling us that by 2050, we're going to grow by another 100,000 people in the city. We're going to grow by about 120,000 total in the county, for Lancaster County. So those are significant numbers. And you think about how much we have changed since 1990 with that growth. We're going to do it again in 30 years. So let's think about how we want that to happen. A couple other things is to keep in mind that back in 1990, there were 4 high schools. We've built 2 new ones since then. We're taking a vote right now to build 2 more. So that gives you an idea of a little over 30 years, we will have potentially doubled the amount of high schools we have here in Lincoln Public Schools. There was no Fallbrook to the north side of our community, and there was no South Point to the south side. So those of us like myself who didn't move here until about 20 years ago, I don't know this community without those major physical items on the north and south side. So it is very interesting to look back and then to look forward. And it may seem like a very long time ago, but Tom Osborne was still 4 years away from his first of 3 national championships. So hopefully we can get back to that over the next 30 years as well. So what is the comprehensive plan? What you see here on the screen is the cover of our current plan. It's the 2040 plan. This plan was created back 10 years ago in 2010. And it was the current kind of conception of what we are planning for. And at that time, of course, that was 30 years into the future. So now we've had 10 years of experience with that plan, and we're going to update it again. But this is really the vision of our community. It sets forward what we think and what we want to be into the future. It's at least a 20-year vision. We're going to be doing a 30-year vision. This is a combined city and county plan. So the planning department is both for Lancaster County and for the city of Lincoln. And we also do coordination efforts with all the small towns and villages and smaller cities. So it really is a complete community plan. So what's really unique about Lincoln and Lancaster County is that from a planning perspective and a lot of other ways, we do have that concept of being one community, and it really is an important part of that. So the one community concept is something that's very strong here in our community right now. It has been for many decades, and we anticipate that to continue. And some of the principles of that are that what we have is a vision that is a major city in the center of a very large county. And what that does is it allows us to kind of think of ourselves as one. And that is a very strong, powerful tool that we have in an aspect of our community. And a big part of that is the fact that we have one large public school system for the city of Lincoln in the LPS. What we do with that is that the LPS school district expands when the city expands. And so we don't have competing school districts. It's a somewhat unique aspect to our community, and it's a very big strength of our community. We also tie annexation to our urban services, so water and sewer in particular. You see our Teresa Street water treatment plant on the image up there. And so infrastructure is a really big part of what we talk about with the comprehensive plan, and we will do that in this process as well. And a lot of this is really meant to provide predictability for the private sector and for the public sector. And that's important because by doing that, it allows a lot of different aspects of our investments in this community to be efficient and to not be wasteful for our infrastructure investments. So now we look to plan forward to 2050. 10 years is a big deal. Basically what that tells us is that of that 120,000 people that we know or expect to grow to by 2050 from today, by adding 10 years, that's adding 40,000 more people to our horizon year. So that's a significant amount of impact on our community. So we have to be really thoughtful about how we want to do that. The county will have about 440,000 people by 2050. Today it's about 320,000, so that's that 120,000 more people. Lincoln will grow from approximately 290,000 people to over 395,000 people. So that is a significant jump for our city, the major city. And we put the Jetsons up there not because we think we're going to have flying cars, but to just keep in mind that how much are we going to change and how is it that we should or want to change, or perhaps how we have to change in order to be the type of community that we want to be. We have 4 themes. We have resilient, innovative, livable, and thriving. These themes for this effort are going to help us define the conversations that we're having. We want to be the type of community that attracts people and retains people, and we want it to be efficient too. For resiliency, this is a very important topic that we will get into with this process. And there are a lot of different aspects to this, but we want to make sure that we are committed to a strong foundation for generations to come by promoting resiliency, sustainability, and security of infrastructure and built capital. We only have to look back to last March to have this topic really make its presence known here when we had our water supply threatened with the flooding. We have our well fields up in Ashland and off the Platte River. And while we were successful in protecting that and we did not have anything worse happen, in fact, here we were here in Lincoln and Lancaster County, the flooding was not quite as significant as other parts of the state, but it was still very significant, and it did threaten our water system and our access to fresh water. That is just one example of how we might need to make sure that by 2050 we're talking about how are we going to make sure that we're meeting the needs of a growing community. And a second water source, as has been discussed publicly, is something that comes out of that. And there are many other topics of resiliency that we'll get into. Innovate. So technology really comes into play here. So there's an awful lot of change that has happened and will continue to happen. I think one interesting topic about this area, amongst many others, is we've had a community conversation about smart vehicles, smart cars, perhaps driverless vehicles. And that is just one example of kind of how might our transportation system change over the next 30 years. And it does not mean that it's going to guarantee that that happens, but it's one of those areas that we need to have that conversation. Because if we don't have that conversation, we won't be prepared for it, or we might miss some opportunities along the way. So that is why we want to make sure being innovative is a big part of our discussion here. Livable. This is a very long-standing concept for comprehensive plans and for planning in general, but it's extremely important, and we're going to continue to have this conversation. We want to make sure that this community in the city of Lincoln and in the county and in our small towns and villages is a place that is inviting so that people can make sure that they can live their lives in a secure way. And one topic area that really comes out of this that's a very important current topic is the quality and affordability of housing. That's something that we are currently studying, and we want to have that discussion with this effort. So being livable in our neighborhoods and our community is very important. And thriving. This is the 4th of our themes. What this is really getting to is that we want all members of our community to have success. We want to make sure that the types of jobs for the 21st century are here in Lincoln and Lancaster County. And how do we change along the way? There's always that information out there that says the jobs of tomorrow don't exist yet. So the majority of our jobs today will not exist in 2030. So we always have to be evolving, and part of that is making sure that our economy is strong. And this ties back into all these other themes. So to have a strong economy for the long term, you have to be resilient in your economy. So getting all these themes tied together, we want to have that conversation along the way as well. So to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing, so right now, this is really the formal kickoff of the big ideas. We're going to take a few months to make sure that we're asking the community for your ideas, your input. Tonight's a part of that. If you haven't taken part in our different booths out in the other area, we want you to do that before you're done tonight. Also, we have an online survey currently. We're just asking for people's input. It's important for us to hear from you and from other members of our community so that we understand what the priorities are from your perspectives. We don't anticipate to have all the answers, so we need to hear from the community to create this new plan out to 2050. So it's very important. We will then take basically the rest of this year to really develop out some scenarios and develop our policies, build off of what we have in the current plan and then make it better. make it more applicable out to 2050. And so what we will then do is go into 2021 actually, and create the plan at that point, and then it'll go through an approval process. There's going to be a lot of opportunity for public input, and we would definitely want you to remain engaged with us. So a big part of that is that we have many different levels of involvement. We have a community committee, we have a staff committee, we're going to have public open houses like this, we're going to have an online presence. So it's very important to make sure that you are using your networks to get the word out to others and to make sure everyone's voice is being heard. It's extremely important for the success of this planning effort. A big part of this effort is we have created a website. It is going to be important to make sure that we get as many people looking at that. We're going to have content out there throughout the process. Some of you have been there. We have over 500 completed surveys. That's where that survey lives right now. And we're going to keep that survey live for about another month or so. You'll see the live results out in the other room as you go back out there. Again, that's another tool to try to get that input, and we're going to be doing some other examples of that. We will also be putting all of our updated information on upcoming meetings and what content was discussed at past meetings, and we'll make sure that you can stay up to speed on this. So that's my spiel here tonight. Again, I appreciate your being here. I'm going to ask David Drews to come up, and he's going to be talking about our projections out into the future, and he's going to give you a little overview of kind of what type of numbers we're looking at, and then I'll come back up and we'll wrap this up, and then we'll invite you to go back out into the other room. Thank you very much.
Hello and good evening, and we can go ahead to the next slide, which should be the first one for me. My name is David Drews. I'm not in a gray t-shirt that looks very comfortable. I'm up here in my suit. I'm at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, not on the Lincoln-Lancaster County planning staff. So we are the population people and put a lot of numbers together. So we, at the bottom line, are a resource. So if you ever need information, maybe even for your own neighborhood or a specific community, if you're from one of the smaller towns around Lincoln, we can sure show you all sorts of different data to understand your community and where we're going. So why am I here? 10 years ago, as they were working on the kind of the 2040 plan, they asked me to do population projections to see where we were going. Fortunately, they've proven to be quite accurate, so they brought me around again to give an update this time so that we could see where we're going to be in 2050. And you know, that accuracy may or may not have anything to do with me per se, but just that Lancaster County has very sustainable and steady growth that we'll see. So again, we're a resource, so we'll make all these slides available. Hopefully they will show up well. I've never presented on a screen of this size before, okay? So I do about 25 presentations a year, so that's one every other week on average, but never one quite in this setting. Everything from a little Kiwanis club and a Rotary club all the way up to speaking to the governor and the state chamber. So demographics are what we do. So let's get started, go on to our next slide. So this first one's going to be just taking a look at Lancaster County's population over time. I'm going to take a quick peek at the big screen. Okay, so that shows up pretty well. Again, it's hard to know. They said 28-point font minimum. You know, it's like, okay, well, I'll do the best. Usually we're like in 14 or something. So the black line is where we've been. Those are actual numbers from the Census Bureau starting back in 1970, coming up to 2018 here. And then the red part is our projection, kind of starting that. And if you notice, it pretty much looks like a line, straight line. You know, there's not a lot of up and down or looking like a wave. It's just steady, consistent growth. And when you look at the annual numbers, it's always within a stone's throw of about 3,500 population increase per year for the county. So it's growing very consistently. You see the end number there at 2050 for about 440,000 population. So that's where we're going to be. As David mentioned, we're at about 320 right now for the county. So that's a growth of 120,000 over these next 50 years. It's pretty easy to remember. The county will be hitting 400,000 in 2040. So 440. At least to me, that's easy to remember. Maybe not for everyone. But again, you kind of use those patterns to see where we've been and where we're going. The projection itself uses migration rates, which are kind of a wild card. They go up and down with the economy, but we use kind of the trend level, what the county experienced in the 2000s, which is also very similar to the longer 3 or 4 decade average. So using those numbers, that's our best guess. Could be a little higher, could be a little bit lower, but over time, we think that it will hit that trend more often than not. Okay, next slide, please. So when you talk about population, it's pretty hard to not have some discussion about aging, okay? So who in here is a baby boomer? Okay, 1946 to 1964 birth year. Okay, so that is has been our predominant population group over time. And just as changes happen with the boomers, there's just all sorts of effects. So this is a look at the population that will be 75 and older in the red line as compared to children under 5 in black. And what do you notice about the two lines? They cross. Okay, so we're going to have, for the first time in local history, I would be sure of it, that we're going to have more elders 75 and older than kids under 5. So it kind of begs that question as you plan for development. You know, what kind of housing do you need for workforce? You know, does that suggest we need more elder care workers or more daycare workers? You know, so there's all sorts of ramifications to the numbers. And I always like to tell people, sit back, look at these slides like it's a movie, and see how it affects you and your work. You know, because it's different for everybody. But we can see that acceleration in the red line starting in about 2021, which is right when the first baby boomers start hitting 75. And then it accelerates from there. And you can see that it's going to be nearly 40,000 by the time we get up to 2050 versus starting in 2010 at only 15,000. So that's a pretty big jump, almost a triple over those 40 years. And you do see growth in the children under 5, but it's a pretty slow and steady growth. So 2024 is kind of that crossover point where we will see the seniors kind of be a larger group than young children. Coincidentally, statewide, that cross is happening right as we speak. Either it happened in 2019 or 2020. So it's also a similar pattern for the state, but a few more younger families, younger children here in Lancaster to kind of even that out. Okay, next slide. So when you have aging, one of the things that's inevitable, you have deaths. Okay, and one of our key population growth components is from having more births than deaths. But as deaths go up, as you can see in the red colored line in the left-hand column, which is the figures for births versus deaths for white non-Hispanics, you can see that population grew by about 17,000 just because there were more births than deaths. In each and every decade, as deaths kick higher, we're going to see that level of what we call natural increase come down. So that's falling there in the kind of the red column. If you go 2 columns to the right, you'll see another one for births versus deaths, and that's for the minority population. In the 2000s, growth there was about 6,000, so a fair degree less than what it was for whites. But the minority natural increase is going to accelerate and approximately double if you look for what we expect here in the 2010s, from about 7,000 growth up to 15,000 by the time you get to the 2040s. So you see those two differing trends there. The other couple of columns take a peek at net migration. That's the other way that the population changes. So it's really easy to be a demographer. You just have to understand births, deaths, and people moving in and moving away. That's all there is to it. Okay, so my job isn't too bad. But again, we look at those numbers, and you see the net migration among whites. It was positive, but only about 1,800 people on net for the 2000s decade. In comparison, the minority population growth was almost 10,000, or right around 10,000. So almost 90%. You can see on the far right column are the percentages. Yep, you can read those numbers, hopefully. 85% of the net migration into Lancaster County was due to minority population groups, so anything besides white. So we see that that's fairly steady over time. And again, as I mentioned, as white deaths kick higher and minority natural increase grows, you'll see that we shift from only about a quarter of our net population gains through natural increase from minority population all the way up to 85% by the time you get to 2050. So that is a change as well. Next slide. Just a couple more to go here. So this is putting the raw numbers of minority population growth into perspective. So I have a chart of this out on the display boards, so come check those out. Our graphic designer did a really good job on those particular boards, so hopefully you can see the trends in a prettier way than this little table. But if you look, starting in 1990, we had about 13,000 minority population, and that doubled by the time you got to 2000. So, a double would have been to 26,000, and I was at 28 when you got to the 2000 census. So we continue to see that growth, and you can look at all the specific numbers, crossing over 100,000 minority population during the 2030s decade. From where we're at here in 2020 with about 65,000 minority population, that's going to about double in 20 years to up to 121,000 by the time we get to 2040. So a lot of growth, and it's very consistent. If you look at that far right column and do the math, it's pretty much increasing 5 percentage points per decade. So we'll be at 20% in 2020 and about 30% in 2040. So that's where that stands for minority growth. All right, next slide. This one's going to take a look at population growth over time, just comparing Lancaster County in black. Those are the actual numbers, and then the projected numbers on the right kind of have the crosshatch, so they're a little bit lighter. The red bars in the middle, those are Nebraska's growth rate. So what we see is that Lancaster County has approximately doubled the Nebraska growth rate in each and every decade. The 1980s, there was an especially large gap because we had the farm crisis in rural Nebraska during that time. Lancaster kind of plugged away and was able to grow 10%. So you do see how much better Lancaster County is doing than the state as a whole. That being said, we do see the growth rate slowing, and again, that's kind of the function of those deaths kicking higher, like I mentioned. But even so, we still will gain about 40,000 people per decade, even as the rate slows down a little bit, and it happens both for the state and Lancaster County. So one of the things we do with data is try to compare it. So again, have a sense of where Lancaster is relative to other places, because one number doesn't necessarily mean anything by itself, but comparing it to see that you're double the growth rate of the state is quite significant. Next slide. So this is taking a look at the kind of the ramifications of those differences in growth. So what is being shown here is the percent of the population, of the state's population that's in Lancaster County. Okay, so if you start in 1990, we had about 11% of the state's minority population in Lancaster, and about 13.5% of the whole state's population was located here in Lancaster County. Since Lancaster County is growing quicker than the state, those numbers are going to trend upward. So by the end of the period in 2050, we're going to have about 20% of the state's population right here in Lancaster County. So 1 out of every 5 state residents will be a Lancaster County resident. You can see it's consistent across the 2 racial groups. And I think there's a lot of different potential ramifications for that, but the one that I put down here was kind of taking a look at representation in the unicameral. So currently, the Lancaster County has basically 7 senators, and then there's a couple partial districts that get up to their full total. And we expect with the growth that Lancaster County will get another unicameral senator here after the 2020 census. And by the time you get to 2050, there'll be 2 more additional senators. So again, you do the math, 10 out of 49, that's about 20%. So that you can't escape the math on that, and it's going to be a relative positive for Lancaster County to have the policy being made for what's important to the local residents. Okay, next slide. We also did household projections, and this is just one of many different things. Again, on the other board, you're going to see some highlights about persons per household and the number of households. We expect to grow by 100,000 households over a couple points in time when you look at the board. So this is taking a look at one person living alone and what portion of Lancaster County's households are when one person is living by themselves. And this is a rising trend both locally and nationally. So more people are kind of by themselves. And in the circle is a look at maybe a special needs population, which are people 75 and older living alone. And you're going to see that that will more than double over the 2000s level. So think about if you're older and living alone, maybe your spouse has passed away, there could be a fall or some other type of accident. You could be kind of lonely in that situation. You know, if you're maybe a male outliving your spouse, maybe you don't know how to cook, or clean, maybe that was wife's role. So there are some special needs within that particular population group for people living alone, and we'll just see where that goes. But the uptrend is in force. Again, as people age, people living alone does increase. It's about 50% for anybody 75 and older, the likelihood that they're going to live by themselves. So that does accelerate, and we see that growth. So it's just one of the ideas of we can prepare for the households and the size of the households, what those households might need for maybe wheelchair accessibility and those kinds of things as the population ages. I have one more slide, and we can go to it. And that is just to give you a plug for the 2020 census. So again, we are partners in that. I have some resources out on the table. But the main thing is if you know of anyone who's looking for a good paying part-time flexible work job, have them go to the 2020 census job site. It's really good for students as far as part-time flexible work. They're paying about $22 an hour for part-time work because it's really hard to find workers right now. So Lancaster County is about 80% of their goal for census applicants, but a lot of other counties, like Saline County just next door, they're only at about 30% of their goal for applicants. So jobs push, it's one of the big concerns as far as having an accurate census. So if you know anybody who can spread that message for census jobs, that'd be much appreciated. Otherwise, the census boils down to money and power. So for every person that's there, you get so many federal dollars that come back to the state, so we don't want to miss people, and then it kind of has the political representation that I referenced earlier. So that is it for me. I will be by the boards to answer any questions, and again, just remember that we're a resource. If there's something you want to see, I'll definitely give you a business card and be able to connect because we like to help out wherever we can. So back to David.
Thank you, David. I don't think there's a planner in the room that thinks your job is easy. So thank you for all your work. Just to kind of think about that for a minute, we have very high confidence in the work that David does. And those numbers are, if they're anything like what we had done 10 years ago, they are extremely accurate, and we feel very good about those. And we're going to base a lot of our discussions on those numbers. So thank you for your work. I'll finish off this portion of the evening by thanking you for coming. You're here because you care about your community. It's very evident. We're happy to have you here. We hope that you stay engaged with this process throughout the next 18 or so months. It's important, like I said earlier, to hear from you and others in the community. It helps make a better vision for the community and a better plan for everyone. And I also want to mention that please eat the cookies. The planning department doesn't need to bring all that back tomorrow. So please take advantage of that, and we all will be out there, the staff will be out in the other room to answer your questions. And again, thank you very much for this evening. I appreciate it.